Funk Revolution. Now, today we are doing a, what the heck is this? The Smile. Thom Yorke of Radiohead, Jonny Greenwood of Radiohead, and then Tom Skinner of Sons of Kemet. That's cool. I'm excited to see this. Tom Skinner is a fantastic drummer. Sons of Kemet is like an experimental Afro jazz group that makes amazing music. But can I be honest? I hope Ed O'Brien and Colin Greenwood, the other, the drummer and bassist of Radiohead, don't have their feelings hurt that they were excluded from this project and replaced for a little bit with Tom Skinner. That's just me being pretty neurotic. I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they probably didn't even want to be a part of this project, and their egos are okay. I mean, they're in one of the most critically acclaimed bands of all time, but still, it's like kind of a weird little head scratcher. Like, how am I supposed to process this when Radiohead, Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood just, frankly, just are like such a I mean, Thom Yorke and that's like what Radiohead is. Sometimes it feels like it's just those two. So it feels like this is gonna be a Radiohead spin-off album a little bit. This album's called A Light for Attracting Attention. I'm assuming it's gonna be kind of like a Radiohead with maybe some more jazz influence, obviously, given the band members. I don't know yet. Let's start by taking a look at the album cover. This is an interesting album artwork because it actually does feel to me like a blend of Radiohead artwork, like those scribbles and stuff. You can kind of just see the way it's like filled in with those scribbles. Something I feel like I've seen in a lot of Radiohead artwork. And then, I don't know, I'm also kind of picking up like some Sons of Kemet artwork as well. Like if we take a look at the Sons of Kemet artwork, there's definitely an emphasis on the fact that this is Afro jazz with a lot of African percussion emphasis. I feel like the Smile album artwork does kind of give me a little bit of like, I don't know, like African art kind of vibes as well, combined with Radiohead, which is interesting. Not something I necessarily really would expect Thom Yorke to venture into, making Afro jazz. I mean, obviously Jonny Greenwood is a guitarist with a lot of jazz influence in his guitar playing. That's what I think makes him one of the best guitar players of all time. Jonny Greenwood sounds like a jazz guitarist playing rock music. If you learn how to play jazz guitar, you're gonna be a better guitarist than any other rock and roll musician, because jazz is really hard. And Jonny Greenwood is able to go because he's playing up and down jazz chords. So I don't know. It's like, even though I don't really think of Thom Yorke as someone who could venture into Afro jazz, and this album ultimately doesn't really sound Afro jazz at all. The fact that it is some jazz musicians kind of like bringing in more jazz, a jazz musician, a jazz musician coming into Radiohead's world is not that mind-blowing or unforeseen or anything. But I will say, ultimately, once you actually get into the music, it frankly does sound. I mean, this is 2/3 Radiohead, 1/3 Sons of Kemet, and it does sound a lot more like Radiohead than it does sound anything like Sons of Kemet. This definitely sounds like we are hearing, I mean, when you combine Jonny Greenwood's very distinct guitar playing, like I said, he's got that jazzy, he's clearly got a jazzy background, he's got this intellectual minor, kind of like just real like thought-provoking, kind of like just nerdy emo, not emo in the genre, like emo as in literally emotional guitar jazz playing rock, with Thom Yorke, who's like just so distinctly like, I mean, let's be real. Sometimes when Thom Yorke is singing, it's literally the most beautiful thing you've ever heard, like, but sometimes you just kind of slap him in the face, because it's like, dude, your voice is too beautiful. It's kind of weird. I want to listen to some rock and roll. And that's like, once you combine those two very distinct musicians into one album, it just sounds like a spin-off Radiohead album. But there are some notable distinctions, which I will get into, but I just want to add one more thing. This is also being produced by Nigel Godrich, who is the producer of like all of Radiohead's albums, and it's very clear in terms of the way Nigel Godrich got the drums set up for recording and mixing Tom Skinner's drums in this album. He's using like the same drum tones as the drum tones in Radiohead's other albums. So the fact that it's a different drummer, because the drum tones are the same as Radiohead's other albums, it just sounds, again, like that's reinforcing the fact that it sounds a lot like Radiohead. And it's not necessarily like the drumming, it's a different drummer who's got a jazz background, but it's not like the drumming is dramatically different from Radiohead's typical drumming. It's a different drummer for sure, but really it just sounds like kind of like a Radiohead side project. There are some notable differences, like I said, though. I really like how this album does kind of have like a bit more of like a staccato feel. Staccato is like a music term for when things are real like din 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 din. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of Radiohead's music is just like, you know, chord, 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 karma, police, you know, that kind of just like letting the chord ring out while Thom Yorke's singing. This feels more like, you know, Jonny Greenwood is getting to really kind of like explore like staccato, staccato, and that's cool. I mean, it's got polyrhythms, it's got like all these kind of weird, it's definitely rock and roll. Some people might want to call it math rock because it gets polyrhythmic and just because it does have just these, math rock has a lot of jazz influence in the chords as well, so you combine polyrhythms with some jazzy chord progressions in a rock and roll setting. Some people might want to say it's math rock. I don't know if I would call it math rock, but that's just kind of an interesting thing we haven't really seen from Radiohead coming together here. And I mean, it's pretty badass. It's very, sometimes it's very angular and like kind of post-punky actually, which is pretty cool. So Jonny Greenwood's guitar work kind of steals the show for me. Thom Yorke's beautiful soaring vocals on top of it sounds great as always. It always sounds great, but it just sounds like kind of more like a moon-shaped pool in Rainbow's Hail to the Thief kind of influence there. It does sound like, I mean, it does sound like that, honestly. There is the song Pana-Vision, which does bring in this very jazzy keyboard with a very interesting rhythm that frankly reminds me a lot of Pyramid Song from Amnesiac, because Pyramid Song does kind of do that same thing with that jazzy, beautiful piano that does kind of, that song kind of crescendos with bringing a string section in. This album also brings in some strings as well. Very beautiful, some synths and stuff. It's kind of interesting because at times this album is very meditative, as if you're listening to The King of Limbs and Rainbow's Hail to the Thief, more kind of just focused on creating like a beautiful atmosphere. So you think of it like the more beautiful songs from those albums. But then there are times where it does get a little bit rock and roll, and frankly, I do like the rock and roll moments, like especially in this album. You Will Never Work in Television Again is probably my favorite song off this album because it does have such like a drive to it, like it's like kind of like you could just hear Thom Yorke just like he's saying cuss words. It's like, oh my god, Tom, yeah, we got some like, you know, real like rock and roll. The Bends, obviously, we can go back to the Bends for some Radiohead rock, but like the Bends was very like intellectual, like sad rock, and it's still rock, it's great, but it's very like, oh my god, Thom Yorke, go to therapy. In this album, we got some like, like, oh yeah, Thom Yorke's being kind of a badass, I like that. And then there's also Thin Thing, which is really dope. If you listen to like the left side of your headphone, you'll hear a guitar that's just like shredding, like real rock and roll, that got that amp nice and loud, it's real hot, and it sounds, I mean, it's like a fantastic guitar tone when things are getting a little bit spicier. I like that spiciness. But there is also, like I said, probably the majority of this album is very, very meditative, jazzy, keyboard, just kind of creating an atmosphere, bringing in that jazz influence as well, obviously, from Tom Skinner. And even though it's exciting when this album does get a little spicier with that rock and roll influence, I have to say that's actually one of the things I'm a little disappointed with this album is it sounds like as if Radiohead discovered a new sound that is working really cool for them, but it sounds like sometimes it feels like they're a little indecisive. Which direction do they want to go? Do they want to go that more meditative, philosophical, jazzy piano with violins kind of direction that's focused on more being beautiful, and then there's times where it is a little bit more rock and roll. I prefer that rock and roll thing, but it seems in terms of the production direction, not only do I feel like it does overlap a little bit too much with Radiohead's traditional kind of production choices, it also feels like when you combine the soaring, you know, high-pitched pianos with the you know, Thom Yorke soaring high-pitched voice and vocals with the strings. It's just a lot of like very like airy, beautiful, high-pitched stuff all kind of going on in this album that does make it kind of just sound very airy and beautiful. But when I'm listening to Jonny Greenwood's guitar work, which I feel like is the best part of this album, it sounds like his guitar work does kind of supposed to have a little bit of like almost like a post-punky feel, like a post-punky, kind of like for example, an Amnesiac. Amnesiac is a very dark album. The production is very dark and warm, and lets, like that song was called Hunting Bears, it just lets Jonny Greenwood's dark, heavy guitar riffs just kind of like fill up the whole album. And this album, it feels like even though Jonny Greenwood's guitars is like he's playing some dark, angular, intellectual, thoughtful riffs that could use some like warmth and heaviness to it, I feel like this whole album is just kind of lacking some warmth and heaviness to it in terms of the mix, and it just seems a little bit more focused on all the airy, like high up, beautiful stuff going on. And when you're listening to an album that's like, you know, sometimes dipping its toes in more aggressive moments, sometimes dipping its toes in more beautiful moments, and you prefer the aggressive moments, but it sounds like the whole thing is mixed to emphasize the beautiful moments. I don't know, it does seem like, I guess, you know, it feels like it's as if I'm listening to a Radiohead album, and Radiohead has kind of discovered some kind of like new ideas and sounds that they're exploring, but one, it's like they don't really ever do anything too mind-blowing with it yet. I feel like every Radiohead album has mind-blowing moments. This doesn't have really very many mind-blowing moments. Like the last 3 songs I think are phenomenal, but I wouldn't say mind-blowing. And then also because the mixing is like a little bit, makes the whole album feel a little bit weak. It's over 50 minutes long. I just feel like if it's gonna be that long, I would like a little bit more, just a little bit more oomph to it. Like if Jonny Greenwood is getting intellectual, post-punky, math rocky with the guitar, I want to get that fucking oomph. I don't want to hear Thom Yorke whispering some falsettos on top of a violin. We already have like a bunch of Radiohead albums doing that. Let's get this album distinct a little bit more from Radiohead. You know, overall, I really did enjoy listening to this album. I did enjoy thinking about it. These are extremely talented musicians who are clearly, they're very creatively inspired and trying new things. I just wish it would have, I don't know, I mean, I'm excited to see what The Smile does next. It sounds like The Smile has its own cohesive sound, even if it does sound a lot like Radiohead, and I feel like there's a lot of potential here. It just feels like they didn't fully expand, they didn't fully maximize that potential, and I do feel like it's ultimately a little bit overshadowed by Radiohead, even though I do think this is ultimately better than like The King of Limbs and a Moon-Shaped Pool, which is cool. I feel like there's potential here that hopefully The Smile will manage to really fully unlock as they think about maybe some different production choices, and hopefully kind of, you know, now that they've got some chemistry together that works, they can figure out how to really just make that chemistry mind-blowing, and then instead of right now where I feel like it's pretty cool. So with all that said, I'm feeling a 7.65 out of 10. That's how you know I'm a good music critic, is because I go into the double decimals. Can Anthony Fantano do that? No, he goes strong or weak. Or light, whatever. Point is, I'm a better music critic because I said 7.65 out of 10. I think that's a fair score. Interesting album. If you're a Radiohead album, if you're vagina, if you're a Radiohead fan, you cannot miss this album because it is like an above average. I mean, compared to like the last 3 albums Radiohead has released, or 2, compared to A Moon-Shaped Pool and The King of Limbs, I prefer it over that. It's cool. It's a cool thing. I'm still worried about the other Radiohead band members, though. I hope their feelings aren't hurt. I don't know why they betrayed you by making The Smile when this could have easily have been a Radiohead album and easily the other band members would have been capable of playing all these songs. I hope there's not internal conflict in the band. That's my neurotic brain going to stressful, scary situations. Okay, I'm done. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I actually got a new camera. I wonder if you can tell. I got a new camera here. I got a new setup. I'm kind of experimenting with it. We'll see how it goes. Thanks so much for watching. Punk Revolution. No.